Welcome to Attaching Any Browser. In this video, we're going to take a look at how you can actually automate different browsers using Selenium WebDriver, and then we'll talk about some of the various types of available third-party drivers. And then lastly, we'll cover some gotchas involved with configuring the drivers on your local machine. So let's get started. As I mentioned, Selenium allows you to automate different browsers, and it supports multiple different browser environments. And essentially, each browser requires a driver to interface with it. And the driver abstracts away each browser's complex internal API and allows you to kind of write scripts in a consistent way in your JavaScript code. So there are a lot of available drivers, but they support multiple types. And since Selenium is open source, a lot of these drivers are third party. And what I mean by third party is that Selenium themselves doesn't necessarily support or maintain the driver, but they will put a link on their site and they'll work thanks to the help of lots of contributors around the world. Now, when I say multiple types of drivers, this means that you can automate different types of things that you might have your project be targeting. So you can target browsers using things like Chrome driver, Gecko driver, or Safari driver. Or you can also test mobile applications using the iOS driver or Selendroid driver. And lastly, you can also run these tests headlessly with a virtual browser using something like Ghost Driver or Phantom.js. Now, you can actually go and get these drivers and see a list of the third-party drivers on the Selenium HQ page, and that's at seleniumhq.org/download. And if you get on the download page, and you scroll all the way down to where it says third-party drivers, bindings, and plugins, you get a nice list of the third-party drivers that are not developed by Selenium HQ. And as I mentioned before, this course will primarily be focusing on Firefox, so we'll be using the Mozilla Gecko driver, although that's not the only thing that you can do with WebDriver. As I mentioned, if you want to automate Chrome, you could use the Google Chrome driver. Or if you want to automate the Opera browser, you would use the Opera driver, and so on and so forth. And as I mentioned, there's even an iOS driver, a BlackBerry driver, and all sorts of things. So I do encourage you to go on the Selenium HQ page and kind of take a look for yourself and see what the possibilities are. Now, as I mentioned before, there is one particular thing that you have to always do when you're configuring your driver to work with your project, and that's telling the system where your driver executable file is on the local device. So if you remember in the last section when we wrote some code, kind of right up here where we say system.setProperty, and we set the WebDriver.gecko.driver property, and we are telling our system that the gecko.driver property should be pointing to this gecko driver executable that I have in my downloads folder. And you always need to do this in your project, otherwise you're going to get an error or an exception thrown that's going to say that the driver wasn't able to be found. So if you ever do see that, just remember you have to go and set the system property to point to the driver executable on your local machine. In the next video, we'll take this further and we'll talk about how we can retrieve a web page using Java code.